Star Citizens' new graphics menu is here in 4.5, and this video aims to tell you everything you need to know about it. Now, it will fail. There's so much in there. I've tried to cover as much as possible. We've talked about VRAM, which is very important now. We've got all visual comparisons of all the different settings going on. We've got a little bit of performance stuff. I'll follow up with more because, again, the scope of this video is so massive that I can't fit everything in. There's a big section on anti-aliasing, which I'd recommend everybody watch because that's very important. But the point is, you can skip around this. It's so long, use the timestamps. The crucial thing though, is that you're probably gonna wanna watch this on as big a monitor as you can and at as high a resolution as you can, because a lot of the kind of looking at the visual stuff is, you've gotta see it on a big screen. Doing it on your phone isn't really gonna cut it, but get some food or whatever, sit down, relax. This is a long one. There's tons and tons of detail in here, so hopefully this is helpful. The first thing that we're going to look at, and this is a bit more complicated than I thought, is this idea of native AA. So this is the setting on the upscaling bit where you basically decide you don't want any upscaling, but actually different things are happening depending on which upscaler you choose. So on the left, we've got no anti-aliasing on, so I've turned it off. And as you can see, things are pretty jaggedy. As you see here, these lines, there's no anti-aliasing happening whatsoever. Then the next one is FSR. And so it seems as though, even when you've got no upscaling on, the different models, TSR, FSR, and DLSS, their own anti-aliasing seems to be being applied because they all visually look quite different. So again, here's FSR. So this is the order effectively. No anti-aliasing is not acceptable, looks awful. You definitely can't hack that with the jaggies. For a while, I've known, and we've been testing on this channel, we know that the version of FSR that we've got isn't great either. And so again, you see quite a lot of flickering and shimmering. It's trying its best to kind of stop all this jaggedness and horribleness, but it's still moving quite a lot with FSR. It's always been the case. CIG's own TSR is a step up, I think, and I think we've been saying this for a while. They've done a good job. It's not anywhere near as kind of, movement and shimmering, whatever you want to call it, as the FSR image. But then on the right, the DLSS image is by far the kind of least kind of movementy and sharpest. And so again, this, if you look in this image here, you look at this sign up here, again, no anti-aliasing, is awful. Look down this bit of wall here as the character sways, you're seeing all these this bit of movement. The same on FSR, this movement here. It's better when it comes to TSR. Again, this bit here up here, you can see it's better on TSR, but again, if you compare the movement in this bit here, a little bit of movement there, but then the DLSS image is by far superior in terms of movement. Another example here is these lights. You can see pretty awful with no AA. It's kind of flickering. FSR, TSR, still flickering, but then the DLSS image is pretty stable, pretty solid. And so it doesn't matter what you've chosen here, even if you're actually using upscaling at all. If you've got a card that has DLSS on, you definitely want DLAA, so the anti-aliasing part of DLSS or NVIDIA's technology. And so definitely that is what you'd want to choose if you've got a choice. Again, we're hoping that CIG will eventually update the FSR model. They've talked about maybe this needing to be after they've moved purely to Vulkan, because it's now using, I think, FSR 2 or something like that, really old version. And we really need the latest version, FSR 4, which is much closer to DLSS. Now, the major change that came with this patch is now that we've got an official bit of support for the transformer model of DLSS. So covered this before, I've made a video about this before, you could kind of hack it into the game, but now it's officially supported. Hopefully, what you can see, if you keep an eye on these, I don't know what you call them, great things, the idea behind the new version of this DLSS model, the transformer model, is that it's much better at kind of keeping detail going. And so if you look in even the version of the CNN model upscaling from 1440p, I would argue that there's more detail preserved in this bit, even when upscaling from 1080p with the new transformer model. and you might say that it looks pretty blurry when you use the older version of DLSS upscale from 1080p. It's just a general lack of sharpness maybe to the whole image. So it definitely, the theory here at least, is that it allows you to upscale from much lower resolution, so from 1080p, and still get a really good image. To show you another part, if you look at this, where's it gone? This great thing here, again, the best case scenario option on the left here is the DLLA model, the Anti Aliasing from the transformer model of DLSS, and then going down, we should see a kind of degradation in theory. But because the transformer model is so good, again, looking at the detail preserved on this grate, it looks better than either of the old CNN model upscaling, either from 1440p or from 1080p. So generally the advice is going to be turn on the transformer model if you are running DLSS. But it's not all perfect. Again, we've talked in the past about how the smoke can sometimes look a bit smeary. Keep an eye on these circles here. So on the top, the left-hand side version, again, is DLAA, just the anti-aliasing, no upscaling. The circles are pretty much circular. they kind of look circular. But then with upscaling, as you add more of it, things start to get a bit more kind of garbly, maybe. You might notice that the CNN model probably was blurrier in both cases. And again, the 1080p CNN model upscaled on DLSS performance is really quite blurry. But if you keep an eye on these circles, they don't look so circular. And I would say they're all getting all kind of, as it pauses there, you can see it. Maybe I'll pause the image. You can see they're all kind of a bit all over the place compared to the original image on the left, or just the anti-aliasing from DLA. If you look at this, I would argue that maybe the circular things, although sharper than the old CNN model, they maybe look more kind of garbled and broken. And it does seem to get worse as you drop down. But you might even argue that the upscaling from 1440p transformer model still doesn't look great compared to the original image. So it's not free, there is costs, but I don't think, unless you're really looking out for that particular example, if you're really zoomed in, you can see it. If you're just playing the game, I doubt you would see it. In general, we'll say I would be probably advising most people to go with the transformer model. And again, if you're trying to get to high resolution, this does kind of free up some graphics cards that can't really say 4K. You can't cope at 4K. But when you upscale from 1080p, if the image now looks a lot better because the transformer model is really good at upscaling from 1080p, you potentially can get some cards running at higher resolutions overall. Now, let's get into the graphics settings, all the different things that they've added, tons of stuff. First of all, let's just do a comparison between low, medium, high, very high, and ultra. These are the settings that you can just choose. You can use auto detect. It will say what it thinks your system can run, but these are the options that you can choose. Now, we'll start with just looking at them visually. I'll put some VRAM stuff on the screen as well, and then we'll go through all the individual settings. This is going to be a long one. But the key thing to see here first is, can you see any visual difference just looking at them next to each other here? Depending on how close you are and how big the screen is and how good your eyes are, maybe you will. Now, the first thing that we'll notice, again, we'll stick with our trusty grates. You can definitely see a difference. And I think from my testing here, this is texture quality potentially. Again, these little great things there, I think Ali Brown said 50% resolution at low, then 75% resolution at medium, and then their full resolution at high. And then I think he said something to do with draw distance. I'll put it on the screen what he said exactly. But the difference is between high, very high, and low. So there are visual differences. And there are quite a few of them in this image. I'll go around this image and then we'll look at another scene. Again, you can see, I think the resolution here for low on this sign thing is much lower. Still slightly blurry there on medium, but then from high upwards, very sharp. And again, you can see a difference, I think, between even high and very high there in terms of this sign. This sign's got these kind of shadowy bits going around here. Might be, I can't remember exactly what that would be, but there is a difference. Again, that sign underneath doesn't exist by the looks of things, and these two, and then there's this extra detail here being lit. Maybe it's been lit by the very high one. Another example would be this thing over here. You look at the detail here. It's got these bolt things here. They just don't exist on low. This box thing is very bare bones on low, but definitely has more detail on medium. And potentially, I think actually if you get close enough, you can see there's maybe more fans on very high and ultra. It's a bit dark, so hard to see. The shape of this dish definitely looks much more kind of rounded and circular on ultra there compared to all the other settings. The detail again on this bit of whatever concrete, much more detail here compared to low. So low is definitely a step down, but then again, high compared to medium, you've got these, I guess, shadowy areas. It looks more visually impressive from high. And that generally seems to be what I'm seeing, is that high, from a visual point of view, at least in a scene like this, is where you, if you can help it, you'd want to start. And then another scene, this is in Arena Commander, the Crossroads of Crime scene, and it's just a slightly different way to show you different things with the planet and the clouds and everything. Again, you can see things like this pad over here, got none of this stuff on top. There's texture qualities for sure, detail qualities. You see this thing here, it looks different as you go up. You can see, crucially, one of the things you couldn't see on the other one is the shadow stuff. So you see no big shadow coming down here, very kind of pixelated one here. It gets sharper, and then on ultra it's very sharp, and you've got this whole bit here that's also being shown to us as well. So again, there are significant differences. Again, the clouds, actually, as we'll get into in a minute, the clouds are still a major part of performance stuff. If I bring up this VRAM usage graph, this is at 4K, and so you can see that I've got the DLSS options on as well, just to show you what happens. All these images that we've seen so far are at native AA using DLAA, Anti Aliasing, but you can save a bit by using different DLSS options. The key thing though is that ultra, very heavy, and what I would say is that this is what CIG thinks in the menu using the little graph thing that they've got that you'll be using. My suspicion is that there are places maybe in the game where it'll actually use more than that. If you're limited on VRAM, well, obviously ultra kind of is out of the question. High, again, it's not nothing to be at 4K using 10, 11 gigs of VRAM. You're going to need a card with plenty of VRAM. Low, obviously, you've dropped right down, especially with DLSS performance on. But like we said, visually, you have genuinely lost some visual quality. 1440p, just to show you this graph, depending on the card that you've got, use these as a guide rather than, this isn't like hard limits or anything, or definitely precise, but as a guide, think about how much VRAM your card has got, and then maybe start on one of these graphic settings, and then you'll tune it and play from there. But yes, it's nothing still to be using nearly 13 gigabytes at 1440p native. Fairly demanding. For those of you at 1080p, again, ultra is using a lot of VRAM, but you can't go any lower than DLSS quality. It's worth saying that. So the lowest the engine in the game will allow you to upscale from is 720p. So you can only use DLSS quality when you're at 1080p. You can turn the other settings on, but they're still always upscaling from 720p. Obviously, the interesting thing here is that low is still technically over a 6 gigabyte target, and I will do some testing with lower end cards to see how that performs. That's kind of outside of the scope of this video, but I'll do some performance testing to see what does that look like, because there's plenty of people with cards like the 1660 series, the cards that I recommend is kind of the minimum spec, even the 1060 6 gigabyte, plenty of cards that are around the 6 gigabyte limit, and so yeah, you will we'll do some interesting testing there. If that's as low as you can get the game, that's probably problematic. But Ali did say that there are some potential savings with VRAM coming in the future, but then he did also say they'd probably use those for the Planet Tech. So that's going to be an interesting one. Here's what happens when you run out of VRAM. So we're here, we're on the official new minimum spec from CIG, which is a Haswell i7. That's why the frame rate is overall pretty low. We're around 29, 30 FPS. But here is what's going to happen. We're currently on low for the graphics settings. And so on a 3080 we're using here, which has got 10 gigabytes of VRAM, we're currently under the video memory kind of budget. If though, for instance, we were to go from low, which doesn't use much as we know, to ultra, if it doesn't crash, hopefully things will catch up with itself. There we go. We've got a video memory over budget message. First of all, the system is grinding to a halt. We've also got massive flashing red over here, which is saying you're using too much VRAM. And you can see that the frame rate, it really struggled and dropped right down. So we're seeing horrible frames. Now, the thing that this actually was interesting, it kind of recovers if you look. You can kind of keep an eye on there. Because we're not moving, I don't think, once it's moved all the VRAM to system RAM that it needs to, it might sort of recover. But if we can go for a look around, you'll see this message from Ali Brown in Spectrum. He says, to verify you're hitting the memory issue, you can open the console and type rdisplay-info4 and look for the line with VRAM. So this is what this one here. You can see lots and lots of red stuff, and you can see the numbers basically say we're using more VRAM than we actually have. If you see the line VRAM demoted, which is this bit here, then you're likely suffering the major performance issue I mentioned, where C is the amount of VRAM that has been transferred to RAM, the CPU memory, but is really needed on the GPU. And D is the VRAM budget the OS would like the game to run within, which factors in other applications. So you can see all these numbers here. This is our OS budget, but we're over that, and so bad times. Now, if we were to go and travel around, and maybe some other things might have to load into VRAM, it would probably be even worse. This is the idea that things are swapping in and out, but because they're not swapping in and out of VRAM, they're swapping in and out of system RAM, because we've run out of VRAM. And so bad things happen, performance is dreadful. But if you were to click on here again and go from ultra and drop it down again to low, in theory, we will see some sort of recovery. We're back into good colors here on the graph. And if you keep an eye on the VRAM demoted section, you see this number is going down as less memory, I think, is having to be sent into system RAM, and it's now all on the GPU. So this then stops being red, it goes back to being white, and you can see that our frame rate has, again, we're on a really low end CPU here, but it's kind of recovered. We're not at least seeing the crazy just 12 FPS that we were seeing. First setting, object detail. So this is Ali Brown's description. Adjust polygon detail on meshes via changing the distances that each level of detail is used and whether to use hardware tessellation, high and above. And this affects GPU performance. Now, if you look here at our scene, we're on a planet in Arena Commander. We are looking at the object detail of these rocks. So if we zoom in, let's take this one for an example, you can see that as we go from low, up from medium, high, very high, and ultra, this little rock here, it improves. It looks more like a rock, probably actually quite significantly more on ultra there. Look at this one, you'd say low and medium pretty much look the same. And then is there much difference between high, very high, and ultra? I don't know if I can see what much. This rock here definitely looks worse on low, and then looks much more detailed on very high and ultra. These rocks here at the bottom, again, low, much more kind of angular. But then as you go up, they start to look more like real rocks. That's just a triangle there at low, but again, improves. It, to me, I'd say from very high upwards, there's not much difference between very high and ultra. So I'm not sure whether I would think that ultra is important for this one, but you definitely, if you could avoid it, you'd want to look to avoid low. And then to look at the scene in area 18, just to show you up here, I think you can see a difference at least between high and very high. So looking at kind of how rounded these shapes are, these dishes are, as you go down, these definitely are much more angular shapes. And so, yeah, again, very high looking good in this case. And as we pointed out in the first section, no detail at all here on this, I guess, air conditioning thing, whatever. Medium and high, you get some fans, but then again, you can see a bit clearer. There's much more detail in the very high and ultra settings there. So I think in general, low is very lacking in detail. So for object detail, I think if you can avoid low, you'd want to. Next up, object view distance controls the maximum distance at which objects are drawn, up to 200% difference between ultra and low, and it affects GPU performance and a minor CPU cost. Now, this is quite hard to find. I struggle to find good examples. If your eyes are good enough, you might be able to see this. On low, we're on an Arena Commander map again. Look at the trees. On the low setting, they basically just stop here at this line, but on medium, high, and very high and ultra, they continue. Now, if you've got maybe even better eyes, you can see that there is actually a difference between medium here and high. They continue a bit further on the trees here. It's pretty difficult to see, but there is a difference there. There are more trees in this section that there's not on medium. And so how much this matters to you, I guess maybe if you're the sort of person who's flying over planets all the time, maybe this is one to play around with. It is worth saying though that on ultra setting for this, I was seeing performance problems. So things were spiking up and down in area 18 when my object view distance was set to ultra, and this was quite repeatable for me, not in all parts of the game, but at least in area 18. And so play around with this, but if you notice on ultra that you're seeing, just if you set your graphic settings to ultra just generally, if you notice this weird bouncing up and down sort of performance on the display graph, then maybe look at turning object view distance off ultra at least. Textures quality, a very, very important one for VRAM usage. Here is what Ali says: changes the amount of VRAM used for streaming textures as well as the target resolution of textures. There's a load of values for how much each one will use. Key thing here though is medium is 25% quality reduction, low 50% quality reduction, and then it affects the VRAM and increased disk access at higher settings. Quickly, I'll just show you what it looks like and then the VRAM considerations. You can see here, we're in a hangar, we're staring at a wall, but you can see again, on low, it's very blurry, both this detail on the wall itself and then this paint looking stuff. So in theory, this is to 50% quality reduction, then medium, we're at 25% quality reduction, and then from high, very high, and quality, we're at 100%. I think you can still see a difference between medium and high, but definitely a low. I mean, again, how often are you going to be staring up at a wall in the game? I don't know, but there's definitely a difference, and it's pretty noticeable at low. And again, in area 18, you can definitely see the lack of quality at low and I think medium here compared to high, very high, and ultra. And even on the Arc Corp sign here, you can see definite reduction in quality here. It's pretty noticeable, but the key thing here probably is the amount of VRAM that you're using. This is one of the, well, this is the key setting for VRAM usage. You can see in this graph what's happening at ultra, very high, high, medium, and low at 4K, 1440p, and 1080p. And you can see that this is the place to reduce your VRAM. If you're wanting to go through this and kind of change every single individual setting and work out what's the best case, well, this is where you probably want to start if you want to reduce your VRAM. Massive difference between ultra and low, between 14.2 gigabytes and 9.9 on the low end for 4K. It's the same for the other resolutions. Looking at what we saw there, you could argue that in these cases at least, maybe high is enough. And so if you put this on high, you've saved yourself a lot of VRAM, but visually it looks pretty good. Next, detailed textures. Change the resolution of textures used for details on characters, weapons, and items or props. Different values per setting, and apparently this affects VRAM, but in my testing, whatever setting you have this on, the VRAM number doesn't change. So I'm not sure. And I honestly can't find where this applies. So we've got a character here. I can't see any visual difference quality in the textures. Maybe it's my eyes. Maybe you can see something. But to me, I've done a few different tests looking at the character himself, just the actual body and the skin and everything. I can't see what this one does. So if somebody knows, you could tell me. But I can't get this one to do anything. Ground textures, though, is pretty straightforward. It sets the resolution of ground textures used on planets. And you can see here, it's pretty obvious. You can see that high is much kind of clearer. The resolution of the textures is higher. Straightforward. Now, this does affect VRAM as well. But as you can see this graph, it's not tons. It does make a difference, but it's not a lot. And actually, all of the settings, apart from low, use high. And so the way that CIG have configured this is that, yeah, only on low will you ever see the more kind of blurry ground textures that you can see on the left here. But I guess if you're running on low generally to keep your VRAM down, if you can afford the extra, 300 megabytes that it kind of looks like, you might want to go on to high, because it does look, yeah, visually, even a bit of range, it's significantly better looking when you're on high. For texture filtering, I've got nothing. This is what Ali Brown says. It says anisotropic texture filtering quality for preserving details at grazing angles. High, medium, low. GPU performance. I've got nothing. I had a look. I couldn't see anything obvious. I'm not quite sure where to look for this one. I will do a follow-up video to this looking more at performance. This is more about the visual quality stuff, but we will do a kind of deep dive into performance as well. So we'll test it then. But for now, I can't give you a visual example of what that looks like. But we can very much see the difference of the shadow maps. So this one changes the resolution of shadow maps as well as their quality. Ultra 200%, very high 100%, medium low 50%. VRAM and GPU performance. Now, it does affect VRAM. We'll show you the graph in a minute, but you should be able to see here the just difference in the quality of these shadows. So these ones here are a bit of a blurry mess on low and medium, but at very high and high, it's, yeah, looks pretty detailed. On ultra though, as you can see over here, it's much more detailed, but it is more expensive in terms of VRAM. Yeah, it's a fairly big jump down from ultra to very high for all the different resolutions. And so whilst it looks the best, this is one where you'd be like, well, it does visually look quite a lot better than the rest. So if you could possibly run ultra, if you've got the VRAM for it, then you'd put it on ultra. But otherwise, well, can you see much difference between high and very high? I'm not sure you can. Screenspace Shadows is another one that I couldn't find a good example of, but it changes the rendering quality settings of Screenspace Shadows. I had a good look. I just couldn't find a good example that could show me any visual difference between them. So that's another one that if you've got a good example, please let me know in the comments. Next up, Planet Volumetric Cloud Quality. Now, we've looked at this lots in the past, but we know that this changes the rendering quality settings of Planet Clouds. So this is still probably the biggest deal on this whole list. We'll do a bit of performance stuff as well in a minute. Again, looking at them low, medium, high, very high, and then the photo mode, the craziness. Take a look at this top section here. You can see that at low, I mean, low is a new setting. Low is new. We only had medium before. So can you tell much difference between low and medium? I don't know. And even medium and high. I've never been able to see much difference between medium and high. But clearly at the end, this top bit of the hair, very high, looks significantly better than the other three. And again, you can, I think, on photo mode see a difference, but whether it's worth the performance cost, almost certainly the answer is no. You only really ever want to turn on photo mode for maybe some screenshots or maybe some video stuff. But yeah, I don't see any real reason ever to put this higher than medium for normal gameplay. Again, I don't think the high looks a lot better. I don't know, at this sort of range, can you see any difference? Again, a lot of this depends what angle you're at and whereabouts, yeah, where your ship is or whatever. But looking at this, obviously the main jump is from high to very high. But the key thing with the clouds has always been the performance. So we've got this scene again in the Serena Commander map. There are a load of clouds in the background, not tons, but if you look at the performance, you can see that low clouds, everything else is on ultra, but we've got low clouds performing 50 odd FPS and 4950. Same for medium, pretty much the same for high. Then when you pop it onto very high clouds, you've dropped down to 40 FPS. And then when you put it on photo clouds, you've dropped down to a lovely 21 FPS. And so there doesn't seem to be much visual or performance difference between low, medium and high. You definitely can see a difference when you go to very high. I'd be tempted just to pop this maybe on, you can pick between low, medium and high. It won't make much difference, I don't think. I mean, the thing would be, is that if you can run very high, it is visually better. And if maybe you use some upscaling, very high probably is the sweet spot. But photo mode, like I said, is not a real setting for gameplay. It's 21 FPS is totally not acceptable. But again, if you were to put some upscaling on, you could probably make very high work. Just to highlight again how important the cloud settings are here, and really why that's the major thing. You can see that when all the clouds are on medium, but then everything else, all the other settings are on low, medium, high, very high, and then ultra. So again, clouds are on medium on all of these, but then the rest of the settings are on the different levels. You can see that performance difference is not massive. And so, yeah, ultra and very high are basically the same here. You've got a couple of extra frames if all the settings are on high. You maybe gain another frame if all the settings are down on medium, and then if you go to low, well, yeah, you gained another few frames. You're at 56, 57 versus 52 on medium. So it just highlights again, the clouds themselves make a huge difference, more difference than any other setting, I think. And so the actual rest of the settings combined are getting what, a difference between ultra and low of 8 frames maybe here in this case. I mean, again, depending on the VRAM you've got, it will limit which of these you can run. But if you've got the VRAM and there's not much performance difference really between low overall and ultra overall, apart from the cloud settings. The cloud settings are the major thing still when you are GPU limited. And again, if you're not GPU limited, none of this will really matter. You'll be CPU limited. But yeah, it's an interesting story. All these settings we've got, but still the clouds are probably the most important thing that you could mess with. Next, we have the gas clouds. Now, this is described as changing the rendering quality settings of gas space clouds. Now, looking at this, I managed to quantum travel outside a massive giant gas cloud here to visually look at this. I think it's quite hard to tell the actual visual differences between the settings, personally. Again, this might be down to lighting. Maybe there's some sort of weird lines going through it here that maybe look less bad on very high. Maybe that's the most I could give it. But the major thing here is that performance does make quite a big difference. So we're at 86 FPS on low, medium 83, high 82, and very high 75. So we have lost a fair few frames to beat on very high, but I can't see much visual difference between them. I don't see any real reason to put this, I mean, really, is there a good reason to put this above low? Again, maybe from a different angle there would be, but maybe you'd go in the middle and you'd go for medium or high, but I don't see any real reason to put this on very high. At least I can't see one here. Now, fog's another one that I found a bit tricky. It says changing the resolution of the local fog, i.e. fog within 500 meters. In the testing I've done here, I don't think I'm within 500 meters, so I don't think this changes it. Higher settings will preserve more detail and shafts of light. Lower values will have a flatter appearance. Like I said, I don't think I've captured this one. There's no visual difference. I don't think I've got it. There is, though, VRAM difference. So you can see on the graph that there's basically 100 megabytes of difference between all the settings. Based on VRAM, well, you might as well effectively have an ultra, but I cannot tell you from this. I'll have to go back and do a load more looking around to see if ultra makes much difference from a performance point of view. Water caustics is another frustrating one. This enables water caustic effects, light scattered onto objects beneath the water. Now, I can't necessarily, there's a difference at low. So at low, everything's much brighter. So maybe that's something, but there's no obvious difference between medium high and very high. There was an IFC episode that did show us some water caustic stuff and explain all this sort of stuff, but not really seeing any difference between the settings on this one. And I guess unless you're like spending a load of time underwater, or maybe stuff reflecting off the water, maybe this one isn't that important. Water simulation controls the number of simultaneous water simulations that can occur at once. Now, this is interesting. You can look at the footage on the screen now. There's not really anything happening, and they're all basically looking the same. And this doesn't really match up with when I tested this in the past. So I tested this back in 3.23. And what I found there was that there was a difference between the different settings. You can see this first one, I think, was water simulation off then, which doesn't seem to be an option now. No actual movement of the water, just the stuff on top of it. Then you look at that, you can see the kind of effect of thrusters moving the water all around, and then it disappears at a certain range. And then as you change settings, basically the number of water simulations, as Ali Brown's description tells us, increases. Now, I don't know why this wasn't working for me in this test. Not really sure, but it did work back in 3.23. There is some VRAM stuff to do with this. If you look at this graph here, there is a bit of a difference between very high, high, medium, and low. Again, this will be a preference one. Is this something that you really notice? Do you fly over the water a lot? Well, then maybe you want to turn this up to very high. I'll do some proper testing, performance stuff on this at some point. Shader quality. Adjust the quality of some material shader effects such as parallax occlusion mapping to add 3D details to otherwise flat surfaces. Now, we can see this in action. It's quite subtle. If we zoom in here, you can see there's more, as he puts it, shader detail, adding 3D detail to these flat surfaces. You can see this great thing here appears more 3D the higher you go up. And that's kind of the case with all of this. It's the same down here. It's also kind of the kind of shadows at the side. So you look at the side down here on very high compared to on low. Again, maybe this one's a better example down the middle. It looks flatter. It gives the appearance of being more kind of 3D on very high. And a good example is over here. If you look at this one here, the detail here, again, it looks much more kind of 3D on very high compared to the low quality shader, which looks much flatter. So that's what that one is doing. Pretty subtle, but there is a visual difference. Post effects. This controls the quality of some post effects such as motion blur, bloom, flares, and refraction. In this scene in particular, in Area 18, there's no good examples of this. But again, you probably could go and find that, again, looking at the flares and refraction at least. Videocom controls the quality of lighting in Videocom call. Can you see any difference in this scene? We've got this, the Onyx guy. Is there any lighting difference there? I personally can't see any. Maybe it's a specific type of Videocom call. Maybe this isn't the right one. It's obviously not that important part of the game. So maybe this is the sort of thing that you could just leave on a lower setting. It's not going to change your life having this look, the lighting look better in this, I think. And we'll just have a quick look at some performance stuff here. So on the left, we've got medium, everything set to medium. This is like a baseline. And then for each of these other ones, we've set an individual setting to its highest setting. So we've got high detail textures here. We've got ultra detail. We've got the object view distance, ultra shadow maps, ultra text qualities, very high screen space, and very high shader quality. Now, you can see by looking at the FPS counter here, for the medium one, it's kind of bouncing between 54, 55 FPS, and most of them are pretty close to that. You can see that by turning on a few of these, you've lost maybe a frame or so. The biggest one in terms of performance loss would be the very high shader quality. We have dropped down to 51, 52 FPS. So you've lost 4 frames, but it's nothing crazy. And you could almost argue, like we said before, that the clouds in this sort of scene in particular are by far the biggest difference maker to performance. And so turning on things like ultra object detail, where you get a bit of extra detail here, more detail up here on this tanker thing, bits here. Well, that's not really costing you any performance, maybe 1 frame. And so compared to everything at medium. And so you might say, well, that kind of is worth it. Again, you look here at the sharper shadow that you get when you have the ultra shadow map on. Well, in this case, it's kind of performing exactly the same as the medium baseline. So yeah, maybe you want to pop that on. Again, the very high shader quality, and again, this is the bit up here that's making this look more 3D compared to the rest of these. The shader quality has had an impact, and so like we said, it's taking it to 52 FPS, but it's not a massive difference. And so again, it's going to be dependent on your system, your GPU, all sorts of factors, whether you're even GPU bound. But this is a brief look, and from the brief look I'm seeing here, it doesn't look as though they make a massive difference individually. And even when we looked before, when we had the clouds on medium and all the different settings to low, medium, high, very high, and ultra, there wasn't a massive difference in performance. In this particular scene, like I keep saying, it's not looking like a crazy performance hit by putting most things on ultra. Again, whether you can run this from a VRAM point of view, that's a completely different question. But from a performance point of view, at least in my case, here with a 5080 at 4K, there's no massive, doesn't seem as though the higher settings really tank performance in this scene. So like I said at the start, there's tons of stuff that I would have loved to include in this, more performance stuff. it's going to require loads of follow-up videos. I've not even obviously touched on Vulkan versus DX11. I mean, that would be its own separate thing. There's masses in the game right now to test, which is really exciting. This video is taking about 3 weeks to put together. It's by far the biggest video I've ever even attempted. So if you like this sort of stuff, do subscribe and like the video, that sort of thing. Massive thank you if you made it all the way to the end. And yeah, lots more performance stuff to come.